Tonight we continue our study in ancient civilizations. Tonight we're looking at this ancient civilization of Egypt. Now, Egypt was founded by Noah's grandson, Mizraim. He is a son of Ham. And if you look on a map today, you still see Egypt. Egypt is one of the longest, if not the longest lasting civilization known to mankind. It's there at the beginning and it's here today. So, with that in mind, that's a lot of history. Egypt has a very rich, robust, colorful history. I cannot possibly cover it all. So we are taking a very high view of Egyptian history, culture, and just looking at them that way. So first thing to know about Egypt is its geography. Originally, it was set up into two kingdoms. When it was founded, it had Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. Now, Upper Egypt is to the south, and Lower Egypt is to the north. Yes, this looks confusing to all of us. Remember where we're talking about. The people of that day did not have a north, south, east, west map to look at. So, to them, it's elevation. Upper Egypt is higher than Lower Egypt. Very simple. As it slopes down to the Mediterranean Sea. The water flows north. So tonight when I talk about Upper or Lower Egypt, just remember it's backwards. You should be able to know where you're at. Second feature of Egypt is the Nile River. Now this is a picture from Google Earth today. Now what you see is a whole lot of sand and then a green line through the middle of it. That is the Nile Valley. Now, the Nile Valley plays an intricate and very important role in Egyptian culture and always has. If you take a look at it from a closer perspective, you get to see that it is a valley. That's not all river. The black line coming through it is the actual Nile River. Now, all of the Egyptian cities are based upon the river, or in the valleys, or in the delta. Now, the Egyptians are experts at canal building. They build dams, they build reservoirs, the waterways. They are water experts. Because the Nile River has a tendency to flood every year, without fail, ever since Noah's time. Now, whenever we think of a flood, it rains, it pools up, it runs down the canyon, and it's gone. That's how we think of a flood. In Egypt, this is not the case. Now, in Egypt, the Nile will flood every year, and the water comes from the Ethiopian highlands, so to the south and southeast. The Nile has its head in the Lake Victoria in Uganda, but that's not really where the flooding comes from. It comes from the highlands. The water filters down, comes from the highlands, washes with it a lot of soil, and the river rises, bringing with it sediment and soil to push down the river. Now, as it goes downriver, it floods everything. Closer to the Aswan, to the Lower Egypt, Southern Egypt, Upper Egypt, Southern Egypt. You see, it's confusing even to me. To Upper Egypt, the water level can rise up to 48 feet every year. That's a norm. In Cairo, which is closer to the mouth of the river, it rises by 25 feet every year. So we're talking about a lot of water. Now, you look at this map here. This is the Nile Delta. So you have Cairo there at the southern port of the Nile. This is the mouth. Whenever that water spreads, it hits here, it hits a plain, and it just spreads out over the entire area. Now, to scale this, so you can see how big this is, if you were to put this on a map of West Texas, put Happy, Texas in Cairo, and then draw an upside-down pyramid to the northwest and the northeast corners of the Texas Panhandle. 10,000 square miles. Floods every year. This is huge. Now you can imagine in Egyptian culture, Egyptian religion, everything Egyptian focuses and surrounds the Nile. So it's a very, very important thing. When you talk about the Nile turning to blood in the story of Moses, that's a big deal. That's a lot of water to turn to blood. There is no rain in Egypt. It is solely dependent upon what comes down the river. So if there is a drought, there is no hope for any water if it's not coming down the river. So this is a very important part of Egypt. The Egyptian timeline. So let's put ourselves in perspective. The Egyptian timeline. Egyptologists and archaeologists do two major theories and thoughts of how to break up time in Egypt. The first one that you've probably heard of is the dynasties. So there are 30 dynasties in Egyptian history. Now, dynasties are very imprecise. If you ask an Egyptologist, they swear by it. But Egyptology, when it was founded back in the early 1800s, those Egyptologists decided this is how the timeline must be. And they built a solid brick wall saying this is the chronology of Egypt. And Egyptology has built everything upon that. Well, recent archaeological digs, recent studies, they've poked holes, so many holes in that wall that it's more like a house of cards. It doesn't hold water anymore. But Egyptology still holds true to that. So whenever they say something happened in this time, depends on who you ask. Time is relative. As I said in my last lesson, time is relative when you're talking about ancient times like this. Reign of a pharaoh, rise of a Sirius star, so on. I'm not going to go all through that again. So I am not going to look at the dynasties tonight. It's too imprecise. I can't do it with any degree of certainty. So we're going to look at the periods of the Egyptian history. So the periods are broken up into 12 different sections. You have the pre-dynastic period, which is any time from essentially the flood to whenever Upper and Lower Egypt was joined together into one cohesive nation. You have the early dynastic periods, which is when King Menes or Pharaoh Menes first joined Upper and Lower Egypt into one whole. And so you have that period of time. This is followed by the Old Kingdom, the first intermediate period, the Middle Kingdom, the second intermediate period, and the New Kingdom. So we're going to go into a little bit of detail on those. Then we go into the Late Kingdom, which is kind of the decline of Egyptian civilization. Then we have the Ptolemaic period, the Roman period, and the Arab period. Now I'm going to refer to these throughout my lesson. I just want to give you an idea of what came first. So that's where we are. Now, the one thing that everybody wants to know about when it comes to Egypt is what? The pyramids. The pyramids are what everybody wants to know about. Now, they are an interesting study in and of themselves. The pyramids were built in the Old Kingdom. They were built by some of the first pharaohs, by Pharaoh Khufu, or also known as Cheops. Common misconception is that the pyramids were built by the Israelites. This is not true. This came long before the Israelites came around. So these were built probably a millennia earlier. Now, there are a lot of theories and a lot of speculation as to what the pyramids were used for and how they did it. I mean, the common ones is that it's a tomb, that it's a temple, it's a monument. These are closer to accurate. The more outrageous ones is that they were built by aliens, that they were alien landing pads. And believe it or not, there's been serious consideration that this is what they were for. I mean, whole study of this. It's ridiculous. But I want to tell you why. It's because engineers of today cannot fathom how this could have been built by early mankind. The pyramid is precise, it's exact measurements, it is still standing after this long, it's perfectly aligned with the compass, with the north, south, east, west. And for people that didn't have a compass, how did they know that? They cannot fathom a people that old and that prehistoric be able to build something like this. So they try to find other ways of doing it. The truth is, it's really not as hard as you might imagine. I found in a children's book, the easiest way to build a pyramid. And it's a very simple process. What's so unfathomable for us is the manpower and the time it takes to do it. The pyramids took between 20 to 30 years to build, with labor forces around 100,000 estimated. Now that's a huge project. So that's where our engineers fail, is it's just because it's such a large, vast project. The pyramids are built by, they're the three great pyramids. These are the seven wonders of the world. They're built by limestone blocks. So these limestone blocks are mined or quarried locally. There are some granite slabs in the king's tomb that have been found. Those came from Aswan, which is about 500 miles to the south. So they were importing granite 500 miles by barge to the pyramids to build these. But the core blocks are where they started. So you laid your foundation and every layer is built with these core blocks. Now I'm going to build a pyramid for you. You have to visualize it if you can. You build the first level, perfectly square, exact. Then you got to get to the second level. So they build a little bit of a rubble ramp to drag the bricks over and put it on the next level. And then you just keep building that rubble ramp. And as you build, that rubble ramp gets a little bit wider because it's got further to go. And eventually you've got a rubble ramp all the way up to the top of the spire. So you're just dragging bricks up that rubble ramp. Pretty straightforward, right? It's pretty easy. Now, the next part of the building of the pyramids is what you don't see in this picture anymore. there was more to the pyramids than this. This is just the core blocks left. That's all that's remaining. There were 2 more layers of bricks that were originally on the pyramids. There were the packing blocks and the casing blocks. The packing blocks were made to make the pyramid a little bit smaller, not as wide stair-stepped, so you've got a little bit more of a finer grade to the pyramid. Then you had the casing blocks. Now, the casing blocks were put on from the top down. So as they removed the rubble ramp, they were putting these casing blocks as they came. Now, the picture that I show here on the on the left, is what they've kind of recreated for visualization purposes. They have put this back on the pyramid so you can kind of see what it was supposed to have looked like. Well, they're pretty rough hewn, but you can see they've got a much finer grade to them, right? Look to the picture on the right. You see that little piece in the right? It's chiseled smooth. The stonemasons and the stone carvers chiseled the pyramid completely smooth surface. So whenever it was done, as they came down the pyramid, you could have ridden from the top of the pyramid to the bottom of the pyramid and not hit a bump. It was completely smooth. So these were magnificent. They're impressive now. They were magnificent when they were built. So those are the pyramids. They put lots of time and effort into these structures. Now, to give you a scale of the pyramids themselves, they are 755 feet long, 755 feet wide, and 450 feet high. So the Chase Tower in Amarillo is 374 feet tall. So the tallest structure in Amarillo is 374 feet tall. So I asked Egypt if I would borrow their pyramids for a day, and I put it in Amarillo. This is what the pyramid would look like if you put it in downtown Amarillo. Now you get an idea of how big this thing is. Now you understand why Egyptologists and engineers can't fathom something like this being built. You know, if you were to put it on the map, 4 square blocks. You know, we thought Hodge Stadium, or the Hodgetown, was a big project. Nothing on this. You know, 20 to 30 years to build between, you know, they're estimating about 2 million blocks. So big project, big project. But it's an important central part of Egyptian culture from that point on. They set something in motion at that time. Now, the purpose of the pyramids, the only purpose that has been validated, is that it is a tomb. There are 2 people in that tomb, the king and the queen. That's it, and their treasures. So it's pretty straightforward. It wasn't a temple. It's not an alien spacecraft landing pad. It is just a tomb. Now, the other thing that people think about when they think of Egypt is their mythology, their deity worship. They have one of the most colorful deities out there, and it's a very wide range. I just want to touch on them because I want you to understand what they were worshiping, because whenever the Israelites came to town, you got to know who they were dealing with and what they looked at. So, first off, in many early cultures, they would worship the essence of a thing. They would worship the elements, like the sun god, because the sun is a very powerful element. It brings life, but it's also very destructive. You have water, you have the moon, the guardian of the sky at night. You have the sky itself, something that's just so vast and so incomprehensible that they would deify it. Now, the other thing is they would take in traits of animals. So you would have an animal that most represented it. The cow. The cow was representative as the fertility god Hathor. A cow is a very nurturing, very protecting, very loving animal. And so the Egyptians took that animal and put the worship of fertility into it. You had Sobek, the sun god. He was represented by a crocodile. Now the crocodile is a very powerful animal. So is the sun. They put the 2 together. One of my favorites that I found that was a really good explanation was Bastet. The goddess of joy was represented by a cat. Think of this. You take this laser pointer and put it on the ground, and you watch a cat play with it. They will play with it for an hour, and they enjoy it. It's so pleasant, and it's so simple. Play with this piece of string. They took that characteristic that they see in that animal, and they deified the animal. So that's how they started their worship. Now, over the centuries, over the millennia, this morphed into something different. They wanted the gods to be more like them, so they humanized them. They put them into human. So some of the ones we started seeing was things like Thoth, the god of wisdom, had the head of an ibis, a very thoughtful looking bird. And sometimes you saw Thoth represented by a baboon. You had Horus, the god of the sky, a falcon, something that you see in the air at all times, something that represented the sky. You had Anubis, the god of the dead, the head of a jackal. Jackals were known for digging up animal bones and human bones, so he was represented by the god of the dead. So you see the worship of these deities and how they morph. And as a 21st century historian, we look back at the mythology of Egypt and we can't make heads or tails out of it. Because if you look at it, you'll see, okay, Ra was the lead god. And then you'll read another article that Aton was the biggest, the most powerful god. Then you see Apophis was the most powerful god. And you see all these and it confuses us. Well, which one is it? Depends on what century you were living in. And the best explanation of this is their religion, their beliefs morphed with the nation. And the best explanation I was shown was this. You had the deity patron of a certain city. So Sobek, the crocodile god, his patron city was Crocodipolis. And I didn't make that up. It was Crocodipolis. He had a temple of his own with a swimming pool that they kept the crocodiles in. That was Crocodipolis. Sobek was the patron god of that city. Then you had the city with the patron goddess Hathor. Okay. Then if you imagine those cities go to war with one another. Sobek wins. So the city conquers the other city. Well, the religion that wins overtakes that city. So Hathor becomes less, Sobek becomes more. And so you see that morph. You see two allied cities grow together. You see brother and sister. You see a union of two cities that grow together or they partner together. You have a marriage. You see this kind of morphism of the religion. Now, to them, it made sense. It was more like pop culture to us. You know, something that it was popular then and it changed into something there. It doesn't completely go away, kind of like 80s music. You know, it just kind of, it changes a little bit, but it just keeps migrating. And to the people of the time, it migrated slowly enough that it made sense. For us, looking back over 1,000 years of Egyptian mythology, it doesn't make a lick of sense. Think about who you're dealing with and that they moved with it. So that's all I have to say about the Egyptian mythology, other than I found my favorite gods. So I want to share them with you. I found the god of mischief. His name's Seth. Seth is the god of mischief. Seth has a brother, Osiris. Now, Seth killed Osiris and dismembered his body and threw it amongst the stars. And his brother Osiris was god of the underworld. So I'm not sure if I'm any flattered by that, but just something fun to throw out there with that. Don't ask me what the animal that is. I don't have a clue. So those are the deities, and that's all I'm saying about that. As we look at the Egyptian timeline, we go back here. The Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms are times whenever native Egyptians were in power, and that Upper and Lower Egypt were as a whole nation. So they were extended periods of time, but you had fully Egyptian rule. Now they were broken up by the two intermediate periods. The first one, the Old Kingdom, the central government collapsed, and provincial governments, princes, kings of smaller areas started to rule. So you had the first intermediate period. Then a pharaoh joined everything back together, and you started your Middle Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom is where we find the Israelites. Now, as I said before, Egyptology does not recognize this. They are, whenever you go to a museum and you go to the Egyptian section, you're not going to find the Israelites mentioned anywhere because they're not going to validate what we believe. They don't want to. And the reason is not because the facts aren't there. It's not where the Egyptologists believe they should be. They're looking in the wrong time period. So the facts are there, but where that original wall was built, it's not in that spot. So those who believe in the Bible, those who have done their study and done their homework and are willing to not accept the typical chronology have found where it goes. And they have placed it in the late Middle Kingdom. Now the late Middle Kingdom ended in a bit of chaos. And the Hyksos, the people Asiatic in nature, which means Middle Eastern in that day and time, the Middle Eastern invaders came in. Now they came in during a time of chaos. Now I want you to go back what I just say. The Israelites left in the late in the Middle Kingdom. Okay, who were the Israelites? They were the slaves. What do slaves do? They work. What happens when 2 million of your workforce gets up and leaves the country? chaos ensues. You have no economy. Your economy collapses. So that is a point of chaos. What else happened when the Israelites left? Who followed them? The army of Egypt followed them. What happened to the army of Egypt? All the king's horses and all the king's men were washed away and never heard from again. They're gone. So you have no economy, you have no defense, perfect time to invade, and that's what the Hyksos did. So they came in and they ruled for about 120 to 150 years. Now, Pharaoh, or the pharaohs, were able to control Upper Egypt, and the Hyksos took over Lower Egypt. So eventually, the Pharaoh of Upper Egypt took back Lower Egypt and started the new kingdom. But during that time, Israel started becoming a powerhouse. You wandered to the desert for 40 years, but eventually they developed the nation. Then they developed their kings. Then they came into their own during the reign of Saul, David, and Solomon. Now Solomon, one of his wives, was Pharaoh's daughter. And Pharaoh doted upon his daughter quite a bit, and you find this in scriptures. Pharaoh doted upon his daughter quite a bit. In fact, he went and conquered a city and gave it to Solomon as a gift, as a present for his daughter, but he just gave it away. So they were allies for all intents and purposes. Now, the alliance faltered, if you will, whenever Solomon died and Rehoboam took over. Rehoboam took over, and 3 years after that, Egypt invaded. King Shishak of Egypt, the Pharaoh of Egypt, invaded Jerusalem, plundered Jerusalem, took the temple treasury, but did not conquer. He didn't lay waste to Israel, so Israel retained nationhood for a while longer. Now, it is close to this time that we see the complete pinnacle of Egyptian rule. I want you to open your Bibles. We're going to look at one spot tonight. We're going to be in 2 Chronicles for just a moment. 2 Chronicles 35. Now, this is the story of good King Josiah. Now, Josiah is considered one of the good kings of Judah because he started bringing the people back to the Lord. He rebuilt the temple, he reinstituted the law, and he tore down the Baals. He started worshiping. But this is the story of the end of Josiah. Starting in verse 20, so 2 Chronicles 35, verse 20. After all of this, when Josiah had set the temple in order, Necho, king of Egypt, went up to fight at Carchemish on the Euphrates. And Josiah marched out to meet him in battle. But Necho sent messengers to him, saying, "What quarrel is there between you and me, O king of Judah? It is not you I am attacking at this time, but the house with which I am at war. God has told me to hurry, so stop opposing God who is with me, or he will destroy you." Josiah, however, would not turn away from him, but disguised himself to engage him in battle. He would not listen to what Necho had said at God's command, but went to fight him on the plain of Megiddo. Archers shot King Josiah, and he told his officers, "Take me away, I am badly wounded." And they took him back to Jerusalem, and he died. That was the story of the end of Josiah. Now, what we find there is several things. They are going to fight in Carchemish. Carchemish is that city to the far north. That is in the Hittite Empire. So Hittites are not allies of Israel, but they're enemies of Egypt and they're enemies of Assyria. Egypt and Assyria allied themselves with one another for a time. Now, I find it interesting. What I said earlier is you will find God in most unexpected places. What does Necho tell Josiah? God is with me, and get out of my way. Well, he doesn't say the gods are with me. He doesn't say your God is with me. He said God, singular, the end. You'll find God in the most unusual places sometimes, and this is one I did not expect to find him. But he was with Pharaoh. God was with Pharaoh in this. Interesting fact. Now, we know that Egypt was not allied with Egypt. Israel was not allied with Egypt because Necho says, my quarrel is not with you at this time, which means you're probably next. So it's not like they're a partnership. It's just that they're not on the agenda for today. So we know it's not an alliance. We don't really know what Josiah's motivation for this was. We don't know why he went out to war because he's not allied with the Hittites and he's not allied with the Assyrians and he's not allied with the Egyptians. Just an interesting little tidbit there, but that's what we find about Egypt. And then after Josiah dies, about I can't remember if it's a few months or a few years later, who invades Israel? Necho. Necho takes over Israel, and Israel falls. And that's when the Egyptians took over. And then they have the peak of their empire. Now, after this, we see the decline of Egypt. Now, Egypt, in the late New Kingdom, the Persians, led by King Cambyses, take over Egypt. And they put their own rulers on the throne. They put their own pharaohs in place. And the Persians control them for about 120 years. Now, when Darius II of Persia dies, the Egyptians take back the throne for a very short period. Now, Darius is the one we have in the Bible. We have him as the king in Ezra, Haggai, and Zechariah. So that's the same Darius. Now, Egyptians took back control, but it wasn't meant to last. Artaxerxes comes back and completely conquers Egypt. And from that point on, Egypt never has a ruler of their own again, a native Egyptian. From that point on, they are no longer a sovereign nation. Now, in 332 BC, another man walks onto the world stage, a man by the name of Alexander the Great. And we'll study him in more detail later. But he walks into Egypt. He's conquered Persia. He's on his way working through the world. And he gets to Egypt and he says, "I'm here to conquer you." And the Egyptians say, "Yay, new king. You want to be Pharaoh?" That's what literally, there was no fight. They just appointed Alexander the Great Pharaoh. Now, Alexander starts a lot of great things in Egypt. He builds the city of Alexandria. Alexandria was one of the most populous as well as the most modern cities of the day. You had the Library of Alexandria, full-blown library. You had, from what the historical archives say, you had moving sidewalks. You had theaters with moving parts. You had the lighthouse. The first lighthouse is built in Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the world. So it is a huge deal. Now, one thing that the Greeks did is they started bringing in other people from other nations. And they bring in the Jews. And they bring in what's estimated to be about, I think it's 100,000 Jews. They bring in 100,000 Jews. And what their purpose is to translate the old Hebrew texts that are in Egypt into Greek. Those texts are eventually translated into Latin, which are eventually translated into what we have today. Actually, they go back to Greek, and then we go translate to our Bible today. So this is during that time frame when everything's being brought together. The Greeks are the educated bunch. Now, what is also going on in Egypt at this time is the Egyptians are being oppressed. They are turned into second-class citizens in their own country, to the point where they are told what they can and cannot grow, what they can and cannot do. They completely forget their religion. They don't know what their religion is. By the end of the Greek period, or the Ptolemaic period, they don't even know what the hieroglyphs mean. They don't know their own language. So they are completely oppressed. Now, going back to Alexander, Alexander doesn't have time to sit around and be Pharaoh. He has the rest of the world to conquer, so he leaves a general in place. The general is General Ptolemy. That's where we get the Ptolemaic period from. Now, the Ptolemies rule for about 300 years, and they have about 15 rulers. Then walks in Caesar Augustus. Now, Caesar Augustus is the current emperor of Rome. Now, he's in hot pursuit of 2 individuals. He is after Mark Antony, who has just tried to overthrow the Caesar's rule. He tried to take the throne, failed at it. So he's pursuing him, and he's pursuing Mark Antony's lover, Cleopatra. So this is where Cleopatra comes. Cleopatra is the last Ptolemaic pharaoh of Egypt. So she is Pharaoh. And common misconception, she is not Egyptian, she is Greek. But she is the Greek ruler of Egypt. So that's where we start with the Roman period. And when now, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, they get to Egypt and then they commit suicide. Caesar gets there in his boat, he walks on land and says, "Okay, I'm here to conquer you." And you know what they say? "Yay, new king, you want to be Pharaoh?" And they hand themselves over again. They think it can't possibly be worse than the Greeks. Well, that wasn't right. Over the next 700 years, the Romans proceed to completely rape and pillage the Egyptian society. They take all of its treasure, they deplete all of its resources, and completely obliterate Egyptian society. And it's not until 646 AD that we have a new conquering force that walks in. And he's carrying the banner of the Prophet Muhammad. And from that point on, you're in the Arab period. And they have been an Islamic nation ever since. Now, they are recognized today by the United Nations. They are a sovereign country, but they're still in the Arab period, if you will. But as far as from the more recent history, I'm not going to go into any of that. But this is the biblical history, the time that you will see. Now that is the Egyptian history that I have for you. There's a whole lot of information and not very much. And I'm sorry that it is that way. That Egypt has so much to offer and there's so little time. I'd be here the rest of the year trying to do sermons on Egypt. But what do I want you to take away from this? Well, there's two things that I want you to, if you take anything of this, I want you to look at this. The Egyptians' point of worship, or the way of worship, they had a belief. They had a belief in the spiritual world. They believed your spirit was divided into two parts. It was divided into your Ba and your Ka. B-A-K-A. Your Ba was your personality, your emotion, your very being. And it went on to an afterlife and left this world, this plane of existence. Your Ka, however, continued to roam the earth. Now, it was in a cyclical form. It started during the day, and at night it would go down in the west with the sun, and it would ride through the underworld during the night, and it would rise with the sun. But during the day, your Ka had to have a place to live. And that's what the tombs, the grand tombs, were built for. They had a home. They were built for a specific person, for that person's eternal resting place. Now, that's the whole point of mummification. They wanted the Ka to be able to find its own body. So they mummified the body, and that's why you still have almost perfectly preserved bodies even today. They did a good job. They knew what they were doing. But they had to have a body to come back to. So that's why you have the mummification. Now, as I said earlier, these pyramids that were built by the first kings, the first pharaohs, they took a lot of effort. They took a lot of work. They took 20 to 30 years before you even died to put the work in. Now, in today's society, there's a lot of work to prepare for death. That's what I mentioned on Sunday, is something happened on last Friday. One of my jobs at the credit union is I am responsible for the accounts of deceased members. I am the one that knows the laws. I am the one that knows the rules. And on Friday, I had to help with 8 different deceased accounts. That's a record for me in a single day. And you have the people who have prepared themselves. You have the people that have set up trusts, have all the beneficiaries in order. You've got everything in the place. And then you have people that had no preparation whatsoever. There's love and hate in my job. I love it when I can say, all I need is a death certificate, sir, and I can give you this money. And then there's the times that I have to tell the widow, your husband didn't sign the right paperwork and I can't give you a thing. That is hard. And it's preparation that takes place well in advance of death. You can't do it after death. The Egyptians understood this in their society. You had to prepare for the afterlife. Now, they didn't have it quite right, obviously, because our spirit does not reside on this planet, on this earth, but it takes work just the same. Whenever you're working on your eternal home, have you put in 20, 30 years of effort, of blood, sweat, and tears, of planning for this? It doesn't build itself. You have to put the effort into it. So whenever you're building it, what does your home look like? Does it look like what they intended it to be? Is it a mansion, a pile of rubble? What is your eternal home going to look like when you get to heaven? Because it takes work. Now, the second thing I wanted to note is the story of Josiah. And this is one that I've had a hard time deciding whether or not I even want to say it. But When I told you last lesson that God shows up in the most unusual places, this time he shows up in the camp of the enemy. How do we face that? He was working with the enemy of God's people. And God was saying, my people, don't fight. Don't do this. Now granted, God gave us warning, or gave them warning. But yet, God was with the enemy. What if I were to tell you that God was with the Russians? God was with the North Koreans. God was with the atheists. Who are our enemies? What if we, as a nation, a blessed nation, a God-fearing nation, fall? And God is with the enemy. That's a very hard thing to do. Folks, we are a very, very young nation, and we will fall. We're not here forever. It goes back to point one. Where is your eternal place going to be? Where are you going to end up at? So no matter where the enemy lies, no matter whether God is here to destroy our nation or has plans to, and I hope and pray he doesn't. I'm not being foreboding and forecasting. I just know that's happened time and time again. And God has used the enemy to punish his people, and we need to be prepared for that. But more importantly, we need to be prepared and do our work and our homework for this. So thank y'all for your attention. It's a lot of information. It's not very much information, and I know it. But next time, we'll be working with the Assyrians, and so I look forward to that. I hope you do too. Thank y'all.